Thank you very much and welcome. And feel free to move a bit further on here if you want to listen.
Come join us on the stage.
Yes, why not? Yes, please do. Welcome, Meg Wolitzer, an author and the author of Hustrun, the Wife, which we published here in Sweden in March. You have written 9 novels. Some of them have been published previously here. And now the Swedish director Björn Runge plans to make a movie starring Glenn Close in the lead role. So we are very happy to hear this. But please tell us about The Wife.
Oh, well, The Wife is a funny, angry novel about a woman who is married to one of those men who it's described as he owns the world. And I know I may be stepping on your toes a little bit, but I've gotten an education in the notion of the Kulturman, which is a term I'd never heard before I came to Sweden. She's married to a big, bloated male novelist, and it's about their marriage, and it's about her decision to end her marriage while she's on her way to Finland because he has just won a made-up prize that I invented called the Helsinki Prize, and it's just too much to be married to this guy who's so awful and has gotten so much attention.
And what gave you the idea? Are you this angry wife?
No, somebody said to me today, but you're not angry at all. I think I am never my characters, but I have paid attention over the years to the difference between the way that women are treated as writers and the way that men are treated as writers. And I was at a party once and a man said to me, well, what do you write? And I said, oh, I write novels. And he said, well, what are they about? And I thought about it and I said, well, they're about marriage and love and desire and sex and family and power and death. And he said, oh, you should talk to my wife. She would be interested. And I thought, what does a woman have to do? So that really was something that stuck in my brain.
And Joan in this novel, she's angry. They are both in their 60s, I think.
Yes.
60, she's 62 and he is a bit older. And she's angry, and in fact she's more than angry. But why has she accepted to stay in this complicated marriage?
You know, I heard a line that really means a lot to me, which is that marriage is a long conversation. And I think that's really true. And I don't think that if you know that you're in a difficult marriage, that you necessarily leave it. I think that there are a lot of reasons that people stay together. She gets something out of it. The book, for me, is about male power, but it's also about female complicity with that power. She gets to travel. She gets to meet a lot of really interesting people. She's a brilliant woman herself. So there's a lot of reasons.
And do they love each other?
Yes. I think they love each other, but love can contain the H word, hate, I think, as well. But I think they really love each other, and I think that she would be really, really lonely without him. Absolutely.
Yes, you mentioned that you know the Swedish Kulturmansdebatt. Yeah. And we have discussed it a lot in Sweden. Is this discussion, do you find it in US too?
Not in the same way that you talk about it here. I mean, I think we don't have a word for him, but we sort of say, you know, those kind of guys. Those guys that get a lot of attention. And the problem is women give them a lot of attention too. Yeah. And sometimes they're brilliant. It's just that there's a great disparity between what we will accept from women versus what we will accept from men. And this remains true. Somebody did a study, a one-person study on not only novels that had won prizes, because it definitely is getting better. The numbers are definitely changing and getting better. But she looked at books that had won prizes, English language prizes, and she saw that, in fact, the major prizes were won by books that were from a male point of view, predominantly. Very few told stories that were from female points of view. So the culture definitely skews toward the male point of view unconsciously.
So you mean that Hilary Mantel, The Wolf Hall, that's a perfect example in a way?
Yeah, and I think absolutely. I mean, it's supposed to be an incredibly brilliant book, but it is about a man, and it's by a woman, yes, so you say, oh, well, we're reading a book by a woman, but could there be a book about a woman that people would read with the same numbers? I'm not sure.
We've been discussing Knausgård's My Struggle here in Sweden, and I think it is a marvelous book. They're marvelous books. But I thought now and then that, okay, would it be possible for a woman to write about giving birth, taking care of small kids, her youth, drinking too much, in 5 or 6 volumes?
No. I mean, it would be possible for her to write it, but I don't know if she would publish it. I don't know if that would happen, because it would possibly be seen as chick lit or something like women's fiction. I mean, that to me, that term makes me crazy. We do have that term, and do you have that term here, women's fiction?
Not as
you call it
outspoken as you have in US,
okay.
But we have it definitely.
But you know, women's fiction, sometimes you find your book put in women's fiction, but you're next to Jane Austen and Virginia Woolf, and I'm like, okay, if that's women's fiction, okay, I'll stay there. But really, I think that if a woman wrote, what is that line, that Muriel Rukeyser line, if a woman tells the truth about her life, the world would break open. I'm sure I've butchered it, but I think that it would be seen by some people as small, or she would be made fun of for being honest and talking about bodily functions or childbirth. Men would be, you know, people might say that they didn't want to read it or it wasn't important. I kind of feel a little crazy about this, because what happens between people that matters is what's important in fiction. A great writing teacher that I had, do you know the writer Mary Gordon? Do you know that name?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. So she's a wonderful American writer, and she was a writing teacher of mine, and she said to our class, only write about what's important. And I think that that's the greatest advice to give a writer. Write about what's important. But there's parenthesis in there, because that means write about what's important to you. And I don't see why writing about raising children, the animal creation and maintenance of that is less important necessarily than what goes on in a boardroom. It's about human life.
Yes, and and both men and women are very interested in it, of course. You have also discussed in an essay the cover. The book cover. We all know, I guess, that we buy a book out of the cover.
Yes.
And you mean that there is a difference between covers made for not by male authors? Please help me.
Okay, so I wrote an essay in the New York Times called The Second Shelf that got a bit of attention in the US, and the title is a sort of, pun on The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. And I was talking about how there's kind of a second shelf for women, what is called women's fiction, even if the work is, in fact, not meant to be considered women's fiction. And sometimes books by women look different from books by men. The publishers want to gear them to women. So you have sometimes with a big novel by a man, you have just a typeface jacket, which says to the reader, this book is an event. This book is important. And then sometimes you have a wonderful and important book by a woman that has a little girl in a field of wheat on the cover. I mean, I jokingly call it Little Girl in a Field of Wheat books. But you can't really imagine two men standing on this sort of train station waiting for a train going, hey, Bill, what's that you're reading? Little Girl in a Field of Wheat. Oh, yeah, I loved it. It's not going to happen. Books should be inviting to everyone. I like the cover you did a lot. Books should be inviting to everyone. They shouldn't seem to exclude anyone. In fact, there was a very funny, I wish I knew the website, there was a funny parody of book covers done in Britain where they reversed famous book covers. And it happened because they put out the 50th edition of the novel by Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar, with the worst cover. It had a woman looking at her makeup, looking into a mirror at her makeup. It looked like it was an ad for Revlon. So they went and took covers of famous books and reversed the gender. They took The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which is an apocalyptic... Was that a big book here? No? Do some of you know the book? No? Okay, some of you do. Okay. So it's basically the end of the world with a man and his son. It's very male, it's very apocalyptic, it's brilliant. But they made it look like a, quote, women's book. They put little flowers around the edges, and it's called The Road. So they had a road with flowers hedged around it, and it was hilarious. But that's sometimes what books by women are made to look at, and it allows them to not seem important when it comes time for them to be reviewed or to be chosen for prizes. So I wrote about that.
And that is really an interesting discussion, which we haven't exactly come to in Sweden yet.
Well, it may happen. I mean, it happened. People started saying that after my piece came out, they were actually going into their publishers and saying, I want my name just on the cover. But she still wanted to look beautiful.
Yeah. What made you become a writer?
My mother is a writer, as we've talked about, and as you know, and you met my mother long ago, and she's 86 now, and she started writing when I was a child. She'd never been to college. She'd never been supported by her parents as a writer, but I saw her sit there and do it. And when it went badly, she's in her bathrobe, you know, she just looked like a wreck, but when it went well, it was sort of transcendent. And I loved to write. I had a teacher who would invite me up to her desk and she would write down stories that I dictated to her, and she was kind of like my secretary, and I was kind of like a businessman, take a letter, you know, I was like that, and my mother saved them. Telling stories is the greatest thing that I know how to do. I love hiding behind fiction. I think it's the greatest, so that's why.
And you are a full-time writer.
I am a full-time writer now, but you know, there's a lot of years in between. I sold my first novel when I was at university, and I was so excited yesterday. Jessica on Babbel had read it, and that made me so happy because it was a book I wrote when I was 21. But yeah, I mean, we all as writers do all kinds of things over the years. Teach, especially teaching in the States. We have a lot of writing workshops.
When you look back at your books, have you written about any recurring theme?
Yes.
Are there things that you always will come back to?
Yes, absolutely. I think that being female in the world, relationships with men, the struggle for power, family is a big one actually too. I wrote a novel called The Position that examined 4 children in a family. I think the overarching thing would be the family. I think the family is so endlessly interesting. Somebody said that every child in a family has a different set of parents. You know, you all have a different childhood than your sister or brother had, and I'm fascinated by that.
Yes, and your next book?
My next book is, about some of these themes now that I think about it. Yeah, it's about the people you meet who change your life forever. And it's about family, but maybe the families that we make rather than the ones that we have.
We are looking forward to see this. If you want to meet Meg a bit closer, you can meet her here. Even buy the book if you are interested.
I will be here.
And thank you for listening to us.
Yes, thank you.